Hey everyone, Prez here, and today we're looking at a Viserai game. Runeblades are a really interesting matchup for Prism in general, just because of the way arcane damage interacts with our pitch curves and the things that we want to be doing throughout the game. Viserai in particular is really interesting because of the large number of rune chants he's able to generate through his hero power and the cards he likes to run in his deck. This leads to a lot of different decisions, both in terms of our gameplay and our sideboarding, so let's talk about it. Let's start with the sideboarding. You'll notice first off that I've cut all the yellow spectres. The most recent rule change surrounding rune chants basically says that if a runeblade targets a spectre aura with an attack, any rune chants on the field will still destroy themselves and deal arcane damage. If we're spending 2 or 3 cards to play a spectre aura, this basically just means that we're losing a lot of value. Any rune chants on the field still deal damage, and Prism is in a worse position to be able to defend that arcane damage because you've just spent 2 or 3 cards on playing the Spectra. That all comes together to mean that I just like to streamline my list. Viserai, especially the current iterations, run very few poppers. Most of them are only on 3 red Amplify the Arcanites, some are on 9th Blades, and some are on Command and Conquers. But for the most part, Viserai really loves to run Runeblade cards to enable his hero power. So the number of true poppers is very low, the number of actual poppers is very low, especially in these low-costed aggressive lists that are starting to pop up. The other consideration here is Invoke Soraya. I'm testing this card at the moment, just seeing how it feels. Into Runeblades in general, but again, specifically Viserai, it's really hard to defend Angels. There are times when I just won't even awaken an angel on my turn, but for that reason, Invoke Soraya is just not at its best in this matchup. Additionally, we never want to destroy our Calming Gesture, our arm piece, because that's our Arcane Barrier piece in this matchup. It's just a lot easier here to side out the 3-block yellow and bringing a card that does something better. Viserai really likes to go first. They've got a bunch of cards in their deck that only create rune chants, and in conjunction with their hero power, they often get to just create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rune chants on turn 0. That's all value that you can't really interact with, and you can't really punish as a Prism player either. Most of the time, Grasp will be the play. Here they've got Arcanite Shard, so they get a 2nd rune chant for free. But even if you had a Spectra or a Figment here, you'd be spending a lot of cards to play it, and then they'd still have an action point to be able to punish you for it. Here, it's just a lot easier to bank the value and try to make it up later. We're going to lead on Erudition here. We can't play around a popper and have a way to push through the damage, so you could think about playing this blue Herald of Triumph, but again, they've got some free value. I'm kind of looking just to make that up. This Erudition will tax their armor, and if they don't have a popper, this Wrath means that it will get pushed through, and getting through an Erudition on a 4-card hand basically guarantees an arsenal. Just like every single other aggro matchup, I'm looking to maximize the value throughout the game, keep the cards flowing, and just get as many figments out of the deck as soon as possible. We're going to see how they block on this Erudition. And they have a popper. That's not ideal. Again, current versions of Viserai are only running 3, maybe 6 poppers in total. So we'll see if I actually think about using Halo here. Halo against these low popper count decks, again, the most impactful thing you can do with it most of the time is fetch Triumph to force through a Herald hit. In this scenario, forcing through this Herald hit is kind of a lot of value. We don't even have to fetch Erudition if we don't want to, which is kind of wild. But if you have an opportunity to use Halo and get, well in this case, 2 value off the hit, 2 cards in hand, Figment off Prism, free flip with Rapture, 4 more damage, up to 4 more life, although probably only 1. This is still a good Halo. And the number one thing that I've just tried to teach myself about equipment is that you're not waiting for the last moment to use your equipment, you're waiting for the right moment. If the right moment happens to occur on quite literally your first non-turn 0 turn of the game, go for it. Why does it matter? It's the right time to use it. Use your equipment. It's what it's there for. We are going to fetch Figment of Erudition here, but that's more about the ponder and guaranteeing that we get that ponder so that we can structure the rest of our turn and our decisions around having that ponder. It's really, really bad if you commit to a line that's only good if you have a ponder to refill your arsenal, and then your opponent blocks your last herald. Instead, we're just going to fetch Erudition on the first herald, awaken Triumph, because it doesn't really have many other uses in this matchup. Just get our guaranteed 4 value, come in with our heralds, and then make a decision about what to do with the Soul Shield. Herald of Judgment does actually have some fringe play against Viserai, particularly for Rattlebones. Rattlebones banishes a card from their graveyard and lets them play it from banish. Judgment says no. Classic. We're going to see how they block, and I actually cut it from the clip here, but they had a second Amplify the Arcanite in hand, which our Triumph turns off for the turn. They took that block back and just end up eating this Judgment. So they won't be able to Rattlebones on their next turn and do some weird Swarming Gloomveil loops with their graveyard, but at the end of the day, this is just a yellow herald. We're just hitting for 6. We're just getting our Halo value for Triumph when we can. The only downside to this turn is having to pitch the Soul Shield for no value. I don't love Soul Shield in these aggro matchups, but it does have some play into Viserai. A lot of their attacks do hit for 6 or more, particularly Amplify the Arcanite, which we know is currently in their hand. And in every single case where the Soul Shield is just an Angelic Wrath, we just get that extra offensive value on this turn instead of having to pitch a card to Rapture. Not ideal, not the end of the world. They're going to play a Sonata, and that's 4-1. They look at 4 cards, and they miss. That's lucky for us, but just like Prism, Runeblades, and Viserai, they do have a brick rate. You're encouraged to fill your deck with a pretty even split of attacks and non-attack actions. So sometimes when you're playing cards like this that are meant to be really, really consistent, most of the time a Sonata should be around 70 to 80% to get you a card. Sometimes they just miss. Regardless, they're following this up with red Amplify the Arcanite and 2 Rune Chants for a total of 8 damage. They get a 3rd Rune Chant, but we were actually able to cover the arcane damage off of that Sonata even if it did hit. Drawing these blues here really demonstrates why blues are so great into Viserai. Being able to cover 1, 2, or 3 arcane damage, and then also being able to convert your 3rd resource into a block value with your footsteps, makes it a lot easier to get value out of your angels. I won't awaken an angel unless there are 2 or fewer rune chants on board. Most of the time it's just not worth it, and it usually just ends up with your angel getting 1 value. Here we're able to get our full 4 value out of our angel, and perfectly happy. We've got our courage token in play, we still have our Figment of Erudition available for a big refill, and more importantly, we've got a Triumph and a Wrath in Arsenal, all of which enables that. This is coming in for 6, and it requires a 9th Blade or a bigger card, a true popper, for them to interact with us. I don't think I'm going to see many out of this pretty low cost curve Viserai deck. Even better, they're trying to get us with Face Purgatory. And this is a really cool trick that you can do with Imperium Rapture. And it's also something that I like to do against Scowling Fleshbag. Our instants and blues in general are really, really good at playing around these cards. In this case, we just activate Rapture, we play our Wrath, get our Triumph over the top, and then completely dodge the discard effect while having 2 resources floating to attack with Soraya once we flip. Really, really good outcome. This is just a complete blowout. Our opponent has used one of their most effective pieces of armor for basically no value. They get to replace one of the cards, they end up getting the full block value out of the cards they blocked with, but the fact that they didn't stop our turn is what matters. We get to throw another Herald here. That's the end goal. The worst case scenario is normally playing a blue Spectre if you really brick on the draw, but we draw a red War Tune, so we get to throw another 7 in behind this. They might have a popper, we don't actually know, and this is kind of why I didn't like Herald of Triumph in the old Prism, which is that I rely a lot on assumed information, and playing Triumph first doesn't really give you information about your opponent's hand. If they have a popper, if they have a 6, they're not going to put it in front of a Triumph. It's not going to do anything. Luckily here, they don't have one. We're still expecting a pretty low popper count out of this deck, so we get to just go fetch any other figment, we get Ravages, we still have an Angel on board, we have a Spectral Shield to protect it, and we got a free 7 value. Our next hand is pretty constrained in terms of resources, so I don't see a world where Soraya lives this turn. That's fine. They did their job, they drew us some cards and got another 7 value, another 7 damage through. We're in a really, really good spot. Our opponent plays a Sonata and misses again. This one for 0. Send a little sorry. It's really, really unlikely. It's incredibly unlucky for our opponent. In total, those 2 Sonatas missing probably equates to a maximum of maybe 10 value. So again, we can just look at the life totals at the end of the game and see if those Sonatas hitting would have changed the outcome. Here, they're going to target Soraya with a Rune Flash. That means that because there's a Rune Chant in play, we actually get to do one of the special things that Prism gets to do and interact with the layer step. Rune Chants pop in the layer step, which occurs before the attack step. That basically means that the source of the attack, or rather the target of the attack, being the Angel, has left the field before the attack resolves and becomes an attacking layer. Functionally, that means that our Angel disappears and our opponent doesn't get go again. Unfortunately, Talishar is bugged in this regard, but just chuck them a little message, tell them, hey, you're not meant to have an AP here, and luckily our opponent respects the rules, we rewind the game state, and they just pass without an action point. It's only 4 value, and that Rune Chant's going to stick around, so it's kind of only 3 value, but it's still just important to understand the rules as a Prism player. There are lots and lots of little things you can do to really change the way your opponent interacts with you. And a lot of these tricks are things you'll only get each individual player with once, because then they'll remember, but everyone has to learn these tricks for the first time once. It's your job to be the person that teaches your opponents the tricks. Our hand is pretty constrained here again. We can pretty much only send either 7+7 off these 2 red heralds, or if this first herald doesn't get blocked, we get to send 7 plus awaken an angel plus 4 and hold an arsenal. Either line is fine, but they both depend on this herald not getting popped. We've already seen 2 copies of red amplify the Arcanite. There is a third somewhere. We haven't seen any other poppers yet, which the longer the game goes on without seeing poppers out of our opponent, the more comfortable I get playing like they don't have them. Here, unfortunately, they do have a 9th blade. So we're getting popped here, we're losing 7 value, we can't really stop this. We're also losing, well, our 2nd herald, but we've got a pretty big lead in this game. It just means we have to play a little bit safer. We get an arsenal, we get to put a good herald in arsenal, get to try again next turn. Drawing this Reprimand is nice. It protects us against a 6 or a 7. It doesn't protect us against 9th blade. So this is really Viserai's opportunity. This is where they have a window. That pop means that they have tempo to get back into the game, and it depends on how well they push that advantage. Unfortunately, Rune Chant plus Reaping Blade is not really going to do it. I'm perfectly happy with a 15 life lead. I'm just going to take all the damage, lose our shield, be able to protect against a 6 or a 7 next turn, and see what they have. Additionally, because we've got this blue, we can actually just, if we have to, pitch to Footsteps. I really don't like pitching to Footsteps in this aggressive version of Prism, just because every single time you do, it means that your opponent has functionally got to block one of your entire heralds with a single card. Prism is really feast or famine. She has some of the best math in the game when it works, and the downside is that your opponents sometimes get to trigger Phantasm and block 5 to 7 with a single card. That's really, really bad value, so I like to try to make sure our opponents can't do that. Reprimand, Halo, Triumph, these are all really good tools for stopping your opponents from being able to interact with you, but Reprimand is quite key because, again, instead of pitching to Footsteps, you're forcing that 3 to 5 damage through, I think it ends up as, and you're getting your on-hits, your Rapture value, you get to swing with an Angel. It's basically just a Wrath in terms of damage output with a different activation condition. Here, our opponent is putting 8 value of block on this first herald, and it's all vanilla. Great, basically means that they don't have a popper. So here, because they're on a low enough life total, I'm genuinely tossing up between sending another Angel before this herald, but we end up just sending this herald and being ready to arsenal this Reprimand. They only have one more 6 in their deck for the most part, so... Ooh, and they have it here. They really should have put it on the first chain link, but you can see how this reprimand would have stopped them from getting value out of it. It would have been a really, really big punish if they had popped us on the first chain link. Letting Phantasm resolve is probably actually a misplay here. This is the third Amplify the Arcanite, and the only other popper we've seen out of them is a Ninth Blade. So Reprimand will have, well, limited targets. I think there it's a lot better to just play the Reprimand, get the 3 value and the extra Figment, rather than setting up for a popper that may never come. Regardless, we chuck this Reprimand in Arsenal. The thinking must be that they've only got 2 cards left. They don't have Tunic up. It's incredibly likely this Angel survives, and they play this incantation, which again just means this Angel survives. We get our guaranteed 4 attack next turn without having to spend a card from Soul. Being able to translate it into 5 if we want to banish a card is nice, but we just drew 4 Heralds. We're just going to swing. Going to come in with Ravages first. We care more about the damage on hit than we do about the shield on hit at this point. Our opponent's on 15, we kind of just need to seal the game, close it out, get as much damage in as possible. We know our opponent can't interact with us with a 6 or a 7, they need another Ninth Blade because of this Reprimand that we've saved, and even if they have the Ninth Blade, we can pitch to Footsteps and play this Herald of Protection behind it, all because we drew a blue. Our opponent doesn't block it, they go to 9, they go to 8 off the on hit, and we get to tutor for another Figment. Again, at this point, we're really just interested in keeping the pressure on as much as possible. I'm not too fussed if our opponent tries to pop us here, because it's just a card out of their hand that they can't use offensively. But because they didn't have a popper, we get to just send another 6 behind this and put them in at a life total range where Sakem, the backside of Ravages, could actually be lethal. They're going to fully block us out here. I wish this Reprimand was a Wrath, but it isn't. It is what it is. Regardless, we're getting the rest of their armor here. That means for the rest of the game, our Heralds are just going to be coming in for overstated values, and they're only going to be able to block from hand. I feel really, really safe when our opponent has exhausted their armor, just because it makes all of our breakpoints and all of our overstated attacks so much harder to block. Our opponent's going to come in with a Swarming Gloomveil here. That's going to make 2 rune chants off these Malefic Incantations, and come in for 4 with Go Again. Because they don't have any rune chants on the field, I'm perfectly happy just to let Bologna take this one and generate our full 4 value off of the Angel. When you can find windows to get maximum value off your Angels against Viserai, you should take those opportunities. This is basically an aggro mirror. Again, you're just aiming to maximize your value as much as possible, and the only things that make it difficult is that your opponent's value is split between physical and arcane. Your Angels, being Ward 4, they don't care about blocking physical or arcane, they'll just block any type of damage. So when you have the opportunity to let 4 physical fall on an Angel, I tend to just take it. Getting maximum value just ups the win rate over the long game so much. Our opponent follows up with Rattlebones, getting back that Swarming and playing it for a second time. This is a really, really strong combo with Swarming Gloomveil, just being able to grab a 0 for 4 with Go Again that makes a rune chant when you play it out of the graveyard. It's really, really good. Unfortunately, we just have such a huge life lead here. We can afford to eat all of this damage and just hit back harder. We've got a red, we've got Triumphs in hand. Having access to a few War Tunes means that we actually get to block with a card here if we want to, which makes life a little bit interesting. I feel really safe. Ninth Blade is the only card that they have that can really interact with us here, just because of this Reprimand in Arsenal. Still think getting the 3 value out of it would have been better earlier in the game, but it's giving us a nice safety net here for if they happen to have a 6 left in their deck. They have Succumbed to Temptation instead, so we would have basically had to get rid of a card no matter what. Luckily, we drew multiple War Tunes, and they, again, probably don't have many poppers left in their deck. Just holding a yellow and sending double War Tune here off 3 cards is really, really good. Just being able to fill our cost curve, send efficient damage back. Our opponent's on 8, we're on 21, we're going to eat some damage here. Probably 5 more after this off Reaping Blade and 2 rune chants. Just gonna wait. And that's what happens, yeah. Taking 5 more, going to 16, Perfectly acceptable here. We've got such a good life lead, we've got 2 War Tunes to send back, we have the flexibility because we held the yellows to be able to send angels instead of these War Tunes if we need to, but we're probably just sending 2 War Tunes. In the case where our opponent can't pop us, i.e. they don't draw another 9th Blade, holding that red War Tune would have been better. But at this point, I think I just really want to be safe and just have that flexibility to be able to awaken an angel if they happen to draw a popper. We need to be able to sustain our life as much as possible, and they just don't have a rune chant in play, which means that we will be able to block their arcane damage if they make them before an attack next turn. They give us 2 Mordred Tides here, really powerful cards. I'm glad Viserai didn't see those earlier, but they're giving us 6 here. We get to send 6 more behind it. That block tells us they don't have a popper. Again, we're just pushing them closer and closer to lethal here. In this kind of endgame state, we're just interested in being able to send attacks consistently rather than sending the most damage. All of our attacks are overstated. We just have to be able to send enough of them within a turn to kill our opponent. Off 1 card, our opponent's turn is just pitch to grasp, make a rune chant, swing Reaping Blade for a total of 4 damage. Perfectly happy to eat this again. We just want to hold cards and be able to guarantee that we can send 2 Heralds with an angel behind it if need be. With our opponent on such low life, I'm starting to look for Sakim lethal lines. So again, I'm perfectly happy just going to 12. Those Sonata Arcanixes at this point would still not have been enough value to make up the deficit that we've presented our opponent, and our Reprimand that's just sitting in Arsenal and not doing anything is 3 value that we gave up when we could have played it on the turn. So it's actually really helpful for me to watch these recordings back as well and talk about them in detail, because I find places where I make mistakes and there are things I can do better. And this is the great thing about Prism. Every single line plays around something. Every single line that you choose to take is weak to something else. So the game is kind of this weird balancing act where you're choosing the things that you want to lose to. Which, you know, it sounds weird to say it that way, but your job as a Prism player is to navigate the things that could beat you and make sure that you find a way to get around them. It's a really dynamic and interesting hero to play as a result. Here, we're just pushing them so close to lethal. They have to give us at least 2 block here. They don't have a card back. We can guarantee Sakim lives, and that's going to kill them on our next turn. It's a really tight game, and even though our opponent lost a lot of value, we can show that it just wouldn't have been enough value to change the outcome. I hope you've enjoyed watching this game, and more importantly, I hope it's demonstrated a lot of the important concepts that I think about when I'm playing into Runeblades, and particularly Viserai. The new Viserai lists that are running around are a lot more aggressive, and really encapsulate these concepts really well, which is that it's still an aggro mirror, their damage is just split, so the hard parts of the matchup is figuring out when to awaken your angels, when to swing with them, and when your blues are the most impactful. You have a lot of flexibility in how you use your cards. It's just really difficult to navigate sometimes. Regardless, I hope you enjoy. Let me know what you want to see next. This has been Prez Practices. Cheers, team.